We are leaving this island, Bunker Island, and we are making our way towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. 8-hour trip by car, crossing borders, madness, towards the beautiful city of Mostar, with a very famous old bridge built 500 years ago. But I did not came for the beauty of this town, or this country, or how cheap it is. I came here for a much darker history that happened in the 90s, and in this episode we'll take you along. Hello everybody, welcome to Mostar. I'm gonna give you a small tour across the old town bridge. Right now, as you can see, it's packed with restaurants, tourists, shops, but if you look closely on the left top side of me, you can still see battle damage. And there is a reason for it. During the 90s war up here, there was heavy fighting in Mostar. When I was young, I saw children drawings of this bridge being destroyed in books about the war. And that is the reason I wanted to visit Mostar, to see what I saw on television with my child eyes.
Is to run. This is the least dangerous way over the River Neretva. A stroll across here used to be recommended in all the tourist guides. One of the bridge still stands, but it's even closer to the Croat positions.
The footage you just saw is exactly on this street and the bridge where we are walking towards too. When I was a child, this whole war and everything I saw on television really impressed me, and it hurt me as a child. I could not imagine what people could do to each other. And as you saw in my previous episodes, when I saw the first battle damage in Croatia, I actually shed a tear to finally, see and hear from people what I saw on television when I was a child. So we decided to definitely give a lot of attention to this war in this small series from our holiday, and hopefully we can teach the youth and adults about this war and why we should not fight each other and just happily live together. Because that is the experience that I had in Mostar. I was sipping my cocktail with Yolanda while there is a woman with burqa drinking tea next to me. And that's all possible, people. It's not that difficult. And hopefully my videos, even if it's just a little bit, can contribute to that part. So I'm gonna dedicate this episode to the wars here, which happened in Yugoslavia in the 90s. And even though it's very hard to explain everything, I'm still gonna try it, because the bridge I'm walking on right now, when it was 1993, things were a lot different then.
It was 4 years to the day since the Berlin Wall had come down.
I have the job, wife, kids, brother, home. Now everything is changed.
Tell me, what are you guys here fighting for?
For what we are fighting? At first, for the place for living, for surviving. That's what we are fighting for. It's the first thing, and after that comes something else. I don't know what.
What comes after that? A Muslim state?
Muslim state, I'm not sure, because I'm not fighting for a Muslim state. I'm fighting for a state, I can say the same as England or same as the French. I mean, state for the people who can live together without any difference.
What this man says, in my opinion, totally catches what Bosnia and Herzegovina is about. But with all things in life, it came at a very high cost. As said, it came at a very high price. Here we visit a Muslim cemetery in the middle of Mostar. You can clearly see all the dates on there are wartime. Specifically in Mostar, it's around 1993 and also 1994, because in Mostar 2 wars happened. So at first you had the Muslims fighting together with the Croats to chase away the Yugoslavian or Serbian army. During that period, a conflict broke out between the Croatian people living within Bosnia Herzegovina and the Muslim population. So it was a war within a war. You know, when you think things cannot get any worse, it sometimes can. This is the Croatian cemetery. The son died, the parents lived. Of course, we also visited the Genocide Museum in Mostar. Really impressive. Unfortunately, the footage we had from here was not that fine to use. But don't worry, all this information will be shown in upcoming videos. Now we do a short battle damage tour in Mostar city. So we're gonna take you on a small battlefield tour. We're gonna walk about 1 hour through the city and all the battle damage we find. And here is one example of the destroyed buildings you see. And over there, another fine example. That was a big grenade that hit the building. Many of these buildings have not been repaired yet. Some still completely abandoned after the war. Some of that has to do with international law. In many cases it's unknown who the owner is or what to do with the building. So it's kind of forbidden to use these destroyed or abandoned buildings until it is known what to do with it or who the owner is. And until that time, most of them are abandoned, and in many cases it's just simply not being repaired. Keep in mind the war was only 25 years ago, 30 years ago. So again, people had other priorities with fixing some holes in a building. And in many cases people leave them on purpose as a reminder of what happened. And yes, this whole city is full of it. It got besieged during 2 wars, and that definitely left a scar on the city. Places where you really see the battle damage are the gates, the fences from the houses. Fine example. And here they even use the battle damage to put a lock through it. And it just shows the fierce fighting, artillery shelling, which happened here. Same with the building on the other side, you see. People actually live in the top floor, bottom floor, still unoccupied. Again, that has to do with these laws. So it's unknown what to do with the bottom floor, and upstairs people are living in. And it's still a destroyed building. And yeah, that's Bosnia. We also saw it a little bit in Croatia. But up here it was a lot heavier. Yeah, every fighting is bad, but here the shit really was on. And well, all the footage we just took, that's literally in 100 meters. We walked 10 meters further and there's another building. And right now we're in the heart of Mostar, close to the most famous bridge almost in the world. And you just, yeah, you clearly see the chaos that happened here. Inside one of these destroyed buildings, totally burned out. Still see. This one took some heavy hits, that's for sure. Of course, lots of rubbish. And you see it everywhere, a building which is in pristine condition, totally repaired, and next to it, still completely abandoned, destroyed, with battle scars all around it. We end the small tour at the World War II monument in the city, built during Yugoslavian times for the victory against the Nazi occupation. The monument is riddled with bullet holes and battle damage. These regions, they really suffered a lot for many, many years. So let's begin. How did this terrible war in the 90s start? Beginning with Tito. He was the rebel leader from Yugoslavia during World War II. He kind of reunited the country, which in World War II was divided, as you can see here. We visited one of his houses in one of the previous videos we made. Go check it out, it's very cool. So Yugoslavia got invaded by multiple Axis countries during World War II, and Tito was the leader of the partisans. He quickly became the big leader, to say it like that. And already during World War II, plans were made up to reunite Yugoslavia, and Tito would be their big leader. And it worked. The partisans kicked the Axis out with some help of the British and the Allied. They were a very strong force during World War II in the Balkans with their guerrilla warfare style. In short, that's how Yugoslavia started.
Yugoslavia!
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 Few Americans know little, if anything, about Yugoslavia. One reason is because not many people know where to find it. Actually, it's really quite simple. Just go to Italy and make a right.
Yugoslavia.
We often think of a bleak, dreary, Iron Curtain country, inhabited by peasants clad in nothing but bleak, dreary babushkas, which may be the case if this is your idea of a babushka.
Swimwear.
While technically the government is a form of socialism, any similarity with the Soviet Union ends there. Oh, you may get the feeling you're being watched here, but I assure you it is for a completely different reason. Citizens here are free to come and go as they please, as are tourists, who need only a passport to enter the country. And while the average worker here makes only around $5,000 a year, the cost of housing, transportation, and food allows the standard of living to be surprisingly high. Why, a typical 5-course dinner, including vintage Yugoslavian wine, will run about $5 a person. The country itself can best be described as the best of Europe, packed into an area about the size of Wyoming. In it, you'll find the Riviera of France, the casinos of Monte Carlo, the islands of Greece, the countryside of Great Britain, the Alps of Switzerland, and Yugoslavia's own pristine lakes. Combine these all together, and you have the favorite resort destination of millions of European tourists.
But with most of the communist fairy tales, this also ended. When Tito passed away, the country of Yugoslavia started to fall apart slightly, year by year, step by step. How was all that possible? You had different types of religion and ethnicities living in Yugoslavia. Of course, if you look back, it were all separate countries, and after the death of Tito, they wanted to be independent. Especially the nationalism of Serbia came to a high point, and Milosevic, you might heard of him, became the leader.
Uspeo sam sve zamke da zaobiđem, da izbegnem. Miloševića mi niko nije podmetnuo. Ja sam ga izabrao.
And that's how Milosevic rise to fame began. In swiftly matters, he put aside all his enemies so that he would have all the power in Yugoslavia. And Milosevic used some tricks to make sure troubles would rise. One of them was nationalism. He totally put it on a next level, as you can see in the next videos. Although he says, of course, it's not his fault. In the meantime, this was Serbian television. They recreated a scene from like 1389, the 1400s, where the Serbs were fighting Islam, and they died heroically. Of course, also Mercedes there being used, as they love Mercedes cars. So all the actions he played with his army and military, he put it on one thing. He had to protect the Serbs in these regions. One of them was Kosovo. But in reality, not many Serbs live there anymore. Still, he used that with fake stories about atrocities taking place in these areas so that he could play it up.
Stražu da bi zaštitili svoje živote jer poučeni su nekim iskustvima iz prošlosti koji su se desili i nastoje da se to nešto ne ponovi.
In the meantime, tourist season was at its height in Yugoslavia.
Absolutely superb, and Yugoslavian people are so friendly.
In the meantime, Serbian rebels, they started to put on roadblocks in Croatia. The Serbians in Croatia wanted to have their own Serbian state. As said, put up roadblocks, and they forbid any Croats to move in these areas. The Croats said, these are just a bunch of drunken Serbs. Croatian television in the meantime. And as tensions in all these republics started to rise, the Croatians said, you know what? Screw this. We're becoming independent. And on the 25th of June 1991, they declared independence. And I believe the day after that, Slovenia followed up on them. The Slovenians took it one step further. They removed all Yugoslavian border guards, replaced them for Slovenian border guards. And, well, Serbia or Yugoslavia was not happy about that. And Slovenia kind of knew what was coming, so they were setting up their militia because they were afraid of things that would come. This whole story in Slovenia was already boiling up for a much longer time. Slovenia, as being one of the richest countries within Yugoslavia, compared with other parts, pretty much had a free press. And their government supported their fellow countrymen. Thing is also, in Slovenia, not many Serbians lived. So it was mostly Slovenians, and they were making joke of the Yugoslavian leadership, especially Milosevic. Slovenia and Milosevic sat around the table to find a solution.
Dogovoriva se midva, če hočete Slovenci oditi, v redu.
Ali dozvolite onda, hajde da promenimo jugoslovenski ustav, da stavimo sve narode u istu poziciju, da uredimo način korištenja prava na samoopredeljenje za sve narode na isti način.
But the Slovenian president did not really had much trust in Milosevic, and he had all reasons not to believe the man, as you can read in the subtitles over here. So at one point, during a night, while all these talks were happening, there was rumbling in the night. So there were tanks rolling into Slovenia, and the Slovenian government had to decide, what are we gonna do? Is it getting into action, destroy them, or do nothing? So the cabinet got together to make a plan and decide. And well, there was just silent at that meeting. And eventually the president said, well, no answer is also an answer. Let's fight. And of course, all this totally went according to the communist way. So you had the Slovenian president calling the Yugoslavian army commander, like, hey, are you preparing an attack? And well, it's like, no, don't worry, we're not attacking you. Don't worry, no tanks are rolling into Slovenia. Of course, the president knew better. He was simply told, don't worry, you can go back to bed, everything is fine. So, for the Slovenes, decision time at this moment.
Predsedstvo Republike Slovenije je danes ocenilo razmere, ki so nastale v naši republiki po nočnih premikih enot jugoslovanske armade.
The Yugoslavian army thought this would be a walk in the park and just take back these border posts and all would be fine.
Bila drugje kot vojašnice, mi smo enostavno presekali te komunikacije.
But the Slovenes had other plans.
Jedeno, eto kako. Šta kaže, jel znate sve podatke protiv koga se borite i sve to?
Otko znam, samo znam da pucaju na nas, ništa više.
Ne znate ko puca?
Pucaju ovi teritorijalci, koji drugi.
A znate li zbog čega se vodi ova ratova bitka?
Otko znam, šta znam, ovi koliko ja kužim tu. Ovi kao hoće da se odcijepljuju, a mi kao ne dam.
And for the Yugoslavian army, it all backfired.
Mi smo dali zelo resno opozorilo vojski, da v primeru, da bomo ugotovili kakršnekoli premike vojaških helikopterjev nad Ljubljano, da jih bomo tudi sestrelili.
Ironically, the pilot of the chopper was a Slovenian working in the Yugoslavian army.
Teško je to bilo. To je bilo moment kada vidiš da više nema šale.
In the meantime, in Serbia, student protests broke out, but they were all peaceful. But the Yugoslavian leadership, they still wanted to use heavy force against the students, which made no sense. But they had a reason for that.
Gomile doleteo je jedan suzavac i ljudi su prosto počeli spontano da beže. S obzirom da je policija bila skroz okolo demonstranata, logično je bilo da na tim krajevima dođe do sukoba demonstranata i policije.
Će vojska u stvari prošetati kroz Beograd i odvratiti demonstrante od vandalizma.
Samo da bi sve svoje snage, kad se vojska pojavi, trebalo da krenu u akciju, da biju do iznemoglosti, bez upotrebe oružja, da prate vojsku i da biju tamo i da biju na drugim pravcima, da se jednostavno napravi jedna akcija juriša u kojoj treba da se bije do iznemoglosti.
This is exactly what Milosevic wanted. This was the first time he was able to use the Yugoslavian army openly.
Svim ustavnim sredstvima i zato tražim.
Now he wanted to use the army to fight in Croatia to stop their government from being independent. But they needed to vote for it. The whole Yugoslavian committee, they needed a certain amount of votes. Serbia was sure that one of these members would vote yes. But unexpected things happened during this voting.
Sada mislim da ne bi bilo produktivno.
Zaključujem sednicu.
These were the first big signs that even on a high political level, Yugoslavia was completely falling apart. People had different visions on what to do with the country. So, what did the Serbians do? Of course, you guess it. Moscow. Secretly, they met in Moscow to see, hey, if war breaks out, will you help us?
Oružja Hrvatima. I ako zapadne zemlje izvrše vojnu intervenciju, da li će nas Rusi zaštititi?
All this happened in secretly, and it only involved the Serbian partnerships of Yugoslavia. All the rest were left out. They just needed the information. It was all legal. In the meantime, President Tudjman of Croatia was openly displaying his army. Of course, the West was all watching this. Remember, Yugoslavia was one country, and suddenly all these countries wanted to be independent. And at the beginning, the West did not really understand what was happening. So the West sent some ministers, hoping that they could talk down all the things that were happening and let Croatia and Slovenia to back down. They thought they would, listen if they would get international recognition about their independence. Loads of diplomacy was going on, but in the meantime, Slovenia was still fighting the Yugoslavian army, and they were actually doing a good job. They had pretty much isolated all the Yugoslavian army elements within their country. The Yugoslavian forces were getting hammered in Slovenia.
Ovdje se gine, ovdje se razbija, ovdje nam ubiše ljude, evo sad oborište helikopter. Poduzmite neke korake. Ako smo vojska, poduzmimo. Ako nismo vojska, onda...
Besmisleno sa Slovencima se raspravljati i sa Slovencima ratovati, jer slovenačka situacija je čista. Oni su imaju etnički čistu republiku, nemaju teritorijalne sporove, jednostavno oni nama apsolutno ne smetaju ništa.
Vojno deo Jugoslavije konfrontira sa Slovenijom.
Zato što kad su Slovenija i Hrvatska zajedno, onda je nama mnogo teško. Kad Slovenija jednom ode, onda sa Hrvatima možemo drugčije razgovarati.
So, because there were no Serbians living in Slovenia, they totally backed out and avoided this war and said, you know, Slovenia, you can leave, we don't need you. Because they had a bigger goal, and that was Croatia.
Jednom narodu da izađe iz Jugoslavije, nemoguće je osporiti pravo onim narodima koji žele da ostanu u svojoj postojećoj zemlji, u Jugoslaviji, da ostanu, da žive u Jugoslaviji.
In other words, he said, if Croatia can be independent and they got a voice, we Serbians also have a voice, and we wanna break up from Croatia and group up with a greater Serbia, a new Yugoslavia. And all this so-called fear and nationalism dates back to World War II, where, yes, a lot of Serbs were slaughtered by Croatian fascist Ustaša. So there were many Serbians who really wanted war. They wanted to fight, kick the Croatians out of their areas. But not all Serbians and Croats wanted that. Specifically this man, Josef Kir, a police chief of East Croatia. He did not want this war. He wanted people to live together. So he tried to break up all these roadblocks. In person, he would drive up to these roadblocks and convince them to break it down to avoid war.
Bisako je govorio, nenaoružan sam, ubeđivao ih i u najvećem broju slučajeva bi uspio da ih ubedi odmah.
But because he did not wanted war, he had enemies. Nationalist Croats.
U Zagrebu kod svog ministra Boljkovca i rekao mu da nema više kuda, da je gotov.
Onda mi je između ostalog rekao, ministre, pomognite mi, ja ću biti ubijen, povucite me u Zagreb. Ja ću raditi sve. Rekao, Kir, pa nemojte biti dijete, popili smo u viski, pa neće biti tako. Ja vas molim, spašavajte me.
With all the danger inside, they agreed to move him away to the capital. But on the day he was about to leave, there was one more incident. He went out one last time. He came to one of his own police checkpoints. The commander was missing. And you can guess what?
Nije ih je zaustavljao, niti pokušao zaustaviti, nego je ispalio cijeli šanžer na auto. Suprug moj je dobio 16 metaka. To mu je bila nagrada za sve mjesece rada i zalaganja. Je bio u rezervnom sastavu policije i da bude apsurd veći, par dana prije je došao kod Josipa po naoružanje i Josip je zadužio mu kalašnjikov. I sa tim kalašnjikovim ga je ubio.
The Serbians in the meantime, they were finding different ways to start this war.
Treba vojsku tamo rasporediti oko srpskih prostora, prepustiti Hrvatima da izazovu sukobe i onda zadržati te teritorije.
Under the flag of trying to protect Serbs, they send out Colonel Mladic. You might have heard of this guy.
U službi otadžbine Socijalističke federativne republike Jugoslavije sa mojim drugovima, starešinama i svih, iz redova svih naroda i narodnosti i sa svojim vojnicima.
But the Croatians really did not saw the nice side of this guy when he arrived at the small village called Kijevo.
Iza Kijeva su bila srpska sela koji su bili blokirani. Hrvati preko Kijeva nisu dozvoljavali da bilo kakva pomoć stigne za ta srpska sela. Tada sam se odlučio da dam jedan ultimatum Kijevu.
So the Yugoslavian army forced the Croats to drop down their weapons. And you can say by now it was the Serbian army. Of course, the Croats refused and Mladic ordered the army to go in. This was the first time the Serb army officially attacked.
U Kijevu, otićete i tamo. Tučena je svaka kuća vatrom iz svih sredstava jedinice iz koje je pružan otpor. Nije tučen ni jedan cilj, niti je tučena ni jedna kuća da bi se kuća srušila.
Naravno, nekoliko kuća se u tom obračunu zapalilo, već kako to ide od artiljerije.
But words in wars like these mean nothing. The village of Forcin, a Croatian village, 1,500 people lived there. When the Croats retook the village, this is what they found. "50 civilians were brutally murdered, shot in their face, butchered with hatchets and axes, burned them alive, and left them on display as a message to the Croatian people."
Važno je znati da li si izgubio ili si pobedio. Da li si heroj ili si na strani poraženih. Da li si jezikom međunarodne javnosti zločinac ili si junak. Da li si neko koga slavi tvoj narod ili neko zbog toga tvoj narod odlazi uz begove i beže.
In the meantime, the city of Vukovar got besieged and the Croats decided this would be the sacrifice for the country. They did not supply the city with food and ammunition and pretty much left it to be destroyed, hoping that with this action the international community would finally see what was going on in Croatia. The Serbs were now sure to capture Vukovar, and this was the footage that Germany needed to convince the international community to step in and help Croatia in their fight against nationalist Serbs. Vukovar fell eventually, and this is how the city looked like right after it was captured by the Serbian army. Completely annihilated, and Vukovar from this moment will always have a special place in Croatian heroic history for independence. This was their survival of Stalingrad. And in the meantime, the next target for the Serbians came on the list, and that is Bosnia and Herzegovina. But they could not send their own army.
We are not supporting any military action in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
We were not provoking or supporting hostilities.
Well, you see the footage. Officially, the Serbian army was not fighting there, but what they did, they just sent out rebels and armed them, so he could not be blamed. And this was the first time ethnic cleansing became known. Around half of Bosnia and Herzegovina has a Muslim population, and they were getting scared of what was coming up. They did not want to be part of a greater Serbia. They wanted to be independent too. But Bosnia also had a very large Serbian community, and in parliament things were getting heated. Here is Radovan Karadzic. You might have heard that name again.
Očekivao sam da će doći do sukoba, ali nisam očekivao genocid.
So the Serbians were playing the same tricks as they did in Croatia. They just needed a match to light the fire. And that happened at a Serbian wedding, where somehow a Muslim shot the broom. And that was the sign they needed.
Movies.
Reach.
So, rebels, Serbian rebels that were taking over the streets in Sarajevo, protecting their neighborhoods. In the meantime, the Muslims held the city center, and Serbians were surrounding the hills with heavy weapons, starting to besiege the city, and the civilians saw war looming and begged their leaders to not start it. The Serb nationalists were really proud of their work, and they invited a photographer with them. And he captured genocide. That's how proud they were of the work that they were doing. This was a man's last plea. After that, he was shot. In the meantime, the leader of Bosnia and Herzegovina did not want war. He wanted all these people to live together as one country. And this was his message after the first signs of genocide. Of course, the Serbians say these things never happened. But this documentary is so epically. They interview the guys who actually did it. And well, just listen to this, bro.
Bosanskih Srba i one su bile brojnije. Međutim, specijalne jedinice i najborbenije jedinice došle su s ove strane. To su bile direktno jedinice policije, takozvane crvene beretke. To su specijalne jedinice službe državne bezbednosti Srbije. Tu su bili dobrovoljci Srpske radikalne stranke. Tu su bili Arkanovi dobrovoljci.
In the meantime, on the same day, a man from the United Nations traveled through these areas.
Vehículo del Comité Internacional de Cruz Roja que me dijeron no pases, tout le monde est fou, everybody's crazy.
A paramilitary commander, proud of the works they do, actually led in a news crew. Here they recorded the regime of terror. Policemen trying to find out who's Muslim or not. Just like the things that were happening in World War II with the Jewish people.
Terrible. Y en una de las curvas, antes de ser detenidos, patinamos. El coche se deslizó sobre sangre. Sobre todo había un fuego de artillería muy importante que venía del lado serbio del Drina. Y yo vi incluso el humo que salía de las explosiones que hacen los cañones cuando salen los proyectiles en el lado serbio.
These are images of the mopping up operations in that area. The man in this video got shot not long after that.
Hajde iziđi bre! Neće niko ništa!
Dvojci li kuću u kući?
Hodi ovamo!
Možete sam.
Čekaj, ovdje. Hajde ovamo, Hodi ovamo! Napred, ajde, ispred!
Ko je pucao sad malo?
Ne znam gdje se vi.
Ko je pucao?
Pa ne znam, Bogovi, napred!
Operacija je dugo smišljana, dugo spremana, tako da nije ništa bilo u nekoj nervozi da se zove hajde hitno treba ovo, treba ono. Sve je bilo dobro organizovano i dobro izvedeno.
Entre tanto se veían camiones pasar con cuerpos de cadáveres. Vi en varias casas alrededor milicianos metiendo cuerpos de mujeres, niños, ancianos en camiones. Yo vi por lo menos 4 o 5 camiones con cadáveres.
Ja ne mogu da kažem da toga nigde nije bilo. To je nekada više organizovano ovde u Beogradu.
There is no one who can believe what is mentioned as a organized genocide, even organized from Belgrade and even organized by me. It's really out of consideration.
I tada je svaki put direktno Milošević tražio da se upućuju dobrovoljci.
Considering the tragic situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have no choice, and our presidency had no choice but to appeal for a military intervention in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
So they called on the United Nations, and their answer was pretty much to the Bosnians like, you cannot win this, just, surrender would be the best option.
Gospodine Izetbegoviću, ne znate s kim imate posla. Oni imaju nekoliko hiljada tenkova, oni imaju nekoliko stotina borbenih aviona, oni imaju 3 do 4 hiljade artiljerijskih sredstava, oni imaju stokove oružja koje su gomilali 40 godina, jel vi to znate? Pa kako mislite da se oduprete?
In President Izetbegovic's position, he was in a very difficult position, there's no doubt whatever about it.
Ja sam rekao da mi nemamo izbora. Mi nemamo izbora, nama preostaje jedno da se borimo ili da kapituliramo. Ako kapituliramo, bit ćemo pobijeni.
Two weeks later, the Serbians finally started their assault on Sarajevo. In the meantime, the United Nations had opened an office there, and General Mackenzie was in there. He was expecting a package from the post office.
The administrative clerk downtown, he came back about an hour later and said, I have good news and I have bad news. And I said, what's the good news? He said, I found the post office. Great, what's the bad news? It's no longer there. It's been blown up and everything in it.
The Serbs knocked out the post office and all lines of communications in the city, including that from the Bosnians' presidency and their general headquarters. The city defenders were simply lightly armed, and it consisted of local criminal gangs, everybody who wanted to fight for a united Bosnia, including Serbians who wanted a multi-ethnic Bosnia.
Je dostigla vrhunac onog momenta kada su 3-4 Princkauera prešli most Vrbanja, odnosno most Skenderija, i našli su se na svojih 50 metara od Skupštine grada i predsjedništva.
Pucalo je na sve strane. I u jednom trenutku moj telohranitelj je rekao da je on korisniji da ide da se bori dole negdje iza zgrade nego da bude sa mnom ovdje. Na taj način čini više pomoći. Shvatio sam da prijeti opasnost da se zgrada ne osvoji.
But Sarajevo's narrow streets gave the defenders a very good chance of fighting, and they were stopping the tanks with anti-tank weaponry and more like that. They were heroically fighting, and eventually they turned the tables on the Serbs and encircled the General Army's headquarters.
Počela borba na život i smrt. Nas je bilo tamo oko 270 komanda ukupno. Njih je bilo nekoliko hiljada, znate, to je blizu stojanje, znate, od 3 metra do 50 metara, tu su oni krenuli, to je rulja jedna, to su fanatici.
In the meantime, and now this story really becomes batshit crazy, the Bosnian president was in a foreign country, so he got in his plane and he wanted to go back to Sarajevo. But the airport was in hands of the Serbians. So they made a deal with the United Nations that he would be picked up on the airport by the United Nations. And they sent somebody there to pick him up. But on the arrival time, the plane was not there.
And he went out and, if I remember correctly, stayed for about an hour and a half after the scheduled arrival time. But no President Izetbegovic and no one out there knew anything about when the aircraft was going to arrive, or even if it had left.
So they decided to land in anyway, not knowing that the whole airport was in Serbian hands.
Nije progovarao, onda je zovnuo pilota I rekao sletite u Sarajevo.
And it exactly went how you would think it would go. The president of Bosnia and Herzegovina got captured by the Serbians right on the airport. So they suddenly had the president as a prisoner.
Pozvao me general Đurđevac da kaže da se Alija na slepo spustio na aerodrom.
So the president was now a prisoner of the man his own forces had surrounded in Sarajevo.
Kad neko počne mene da ubeđuje da on više mrzi Aliju Izetbegovića, nemoj ga mrzeti, ja imam najviše razloga za to, ali to ne mora da znači da ga likvidirate.
The president of Bosnia held the whole country together, the government. But his colleagues in Sarajevo did not know he got captured on the airplane. And now this crazy story starts. Earlier, a lot of children were airlifted because of safety. And a worried mother called to the airport to see if her child indeed went through safely. Turns out she got a hold of the airport, and in that same room, the president of Bosnia was there. He knew this was his chance, so he asked for the phone.
On je na to rekao, da, gospođo, jeste, u pravu ste, da, Ilija Izetbegović, predsjedništva Bosne I Hercegovine na telefon. Vidite, hoćete biti tako dobri, molim vas. Ja sam, znate, ovdje na aerodromu, pa bi vas ja zamolio da zovnete predsjedništvo, da kažete u predsjedništvu da sam s vama razgovarao, da se nalazim ovdje, a ako ne možete da dobijete predsjedništvo, molim vas, zovnite radio-televiziju, obavijeste radio-televiziju da se nalazim ovdje I da me armija ne dozvoljava da dođem u grad I da traži da idem da vidim generala Kukanjca. Da, gospođo, da, generala Kukanjca.
Yeah, like how crazy can it be? A president getting a hold of some women in the city who happen to have a working phone line. That's how everybody knew he was a prisoner. And it also reached the TV news, etc. And yeah, this is just one crazy story.
Režim mi javljaju da imamo na telefonskoj liniji predsjedništva Bosne I Hercegovine Iliju Izetbegovića. I kakav je vaš položaj u Lukavici?
Ja sam ovdje praktički zarobljenik. Ne, evo, general Đurđevac kaže da to nije tako.
Zašto ti ne dođeš u predsjedništvo?
Zašto što mi ne daju da dođem?
O čemu se radi?
Pa ne može to tako, samo trenutak.
Alo, to je istina. Na kom telefonu se ti nalaziš?
Nama su pokidali linije, razumiješ?
Kako ste ovi sad uspjeli dobiti?
Pa evo televizija.
Preko televizije, gospodine predsjedniče.
Radio uspostavio ove linije, ovo je preko radija.
Da.
Sarajevo watched, amazed about the things unfolding live on television. In the meantime, he appointed somebody else in case he got killed. Ejub Ganić, this man.
Vreme tereta u tom trenutku.
Alija, samo trenutak, molim vas. Narodna javnost prati da je predsjedništva jedne suverene I nezavisne države uhapšen od armije koja nema legitimitet u ovoj državi. Beograd zna šta je uradio. Molim vas, predsjednika, dozvolite predsjedniku da dođe na svoje radno mjesto, pustite ga iz zatvoreništva.
Gospodine generale, nešto moramo da učinimo. Dajte, molim vas.
Evo, gospodin Izetbegović je ovdje. Ali ja molim da nam se malo vjeruje. Mi tražimo da se nama omogući da se izvučemo iz grada Sarajeva.
Imate garanciju predsjedništva Bosne I Hercegovine da će put koji vi odaberete biti...
Niko nema autoriteta da obuzda ove ljude koji...
Ima autoriteta, kako nema?
Preduvjet je da se budete sigurni da teritorijalna odbrana teritorijalna odbrana sluša predsjedništvo.
Dobro, to čuješ, dadnite tako uputstvo TO-u.
Daćemo tako uputstvo TO, međutim, mi ne može država...
Ja imam dovoljno
Sve je zatvoreno oko tebe. Ptica ne može izaći. Ispod tebe je prokopan tunel. Nemoj se igrati sa glavom.
Naredite prekid vatre ili će, bojim se, svašta biti.
Vodi računa da se predsjedniku ništa ne dogodi. Ti ćeš fino da izađeš. Dogovorit ćemo se za tvoje vojnike. Ti znaš da smo sarađivali. Smiri se, Milutine. Jedna mala greška, ideš u zrak do treba.
General Mackenzie videoed this, guys. He had a hobby, and that was making home videos. So he brought his camera with him. So here you have a general from the United Nations recording all these things live as it's happening.
Ovako, ovdje na dogovoru pred Evropom i svetom dogovorili smo se.
General Mackenzie and the United Nations rushed to the army base to collect the president. The deputy president walked back to Bosnian territory.
Granice était très inquiet. Il m'a dit je suis pas sûr, j'ai peur, il y a des éléments incontrôlés, je suis très inquiet.
General Mackenzie se pojavio u tih sati gore u posredovanju da se ja oslobodim.
After a convoy, I can only look after individuals. And the president said not to worry. I will guarantee the security of the convoy.
So the United Nations would help them get through the city. But imagine, you're with a convoy, only half protected by the United Nations, in a city full of people who are uncontrolled, full of anger, and just want to annihilate that complete convoy of enemies. And yes, it went wrong. The convoy got split up, got attacked, but the Bosnian president peeked out of the vehicle.
Pointed in the back of the trucks, and the equipment was coming out very, very quickly.
Na sve strane se pucalo. Tad sam vidio generala Divjaka.
Bravo, Divjak, bravo. Šta je bilo?
On je pokušavao da smiri tu pucnjavu, ali ja sam vidio da se očigledno tamo gine.
Tada sam pozivao pripadnike teritorijalne odbrane da se ne otvara vatra, da je predsjednik insistirao da se ovaj problem reši bez oružanog sukobljavanja.
President Izetbegovic stood up very calm, not in the least bit panicky. General Kukanjac didn't look terribly happy.
Ja sam imao oružje, pištolj, i ja sam bio spreman u toku pokreta da ubijem Aliju.
So, all parties ordered to hold fire. They radioed to the headquarters to get the ambush lifted.
Hoćemo samo da njih zadržu, pregovaraju i kad završe pregovore normalno ljudski da se sve uradi. I sa prijetnjama i na silu.
Ovo smo ispregovarali, ovo. Sutra se nastavlja 11 sati pregovori.
Zagi, sve je dogovoreno.
Tako da je jedno pola sata obavljen razgovor sa predsjednikom.
A što to govori? Ispunili. Ispunili predsjednik Matije, niko neće Bukarcu. Ko to govori?
Govori Divjak da se predsjednik dovede u predsjedništvo, a da se kolona pusti.
To vrijeme još uvijek nije bila ustrojena armija, niti je moglo naše naređenje stići do svakog pojedinca.
The local Bosnian commanders went back along the convoy, quieting people down, calming them down, and people, poof, disappeared.
So, the president was back in his country as a commander of the country, but nobody would help him to take control of their territory or fight back.
Unilateral use of United States force. As we have said before, we are not and we cannot be the world's policeman.
In the meantime, Milosevic sent a new commander, General Mladic, to be the commander of the army. And this is what he ordered for Sarajevo.
General Mladic. Da, izvolite. Bez panike, ko si ti prvo? Vukašinović. Vukašinović? Jesno. Pukovnik? Jesno. Direktnim pogodcima držite pod vatrom predsjedništvo i skupštinu. I tucite polako u intervalima dok ja ne naredim da se prekine. Razumem. Poleti će tuci i popali će tuci, samo nema srpskoga življa mnogo. Da. Idi na artiljerijsko osmatranje, da ne mogu da spavaju, da razdučimo pamet njihovu.
In the meantime, you had Srebrenica, which was full of refugees, and there were United Nations troops. And all they did say was like, we'll make it a safe area.
Zone in Srebrenica, that will be a safe area.
Well, what does that mean?
Safe area? You know? Okay.
And yes, this all sounds as stupid as it is. The United Nations made big mistakes in this war and totally underestimated things which would be happening. The Serbians did not like it. Srebrenica would be a safe area, so they made a deal with it. It will be a safe area if all Muslim fighters would surrender their weapons. Well, what would you do if you are being attacked and having genocide against your people? Are you giving all your weapons away? No. But under pressure from the United Nations, they eventually managed to get the Muslim fighters to turn down their weapons, even though they did not want that. The result was that Srebrenica pretty much became one large prison, totally controlled by the Serbian army. The UN claimed a victory, but we all knew what would happen in the end with Srebrenica.
A cambio de la presencia de una compañía canadiense en el lugar y a cambio de la rendición de Srebrenica para convertirlo en una safe area que en términos serbo-bosnios era un gran campo de concentración rodeado y controlado militarmente por ellos.
So yes, Srebrenica was waiting for a genocide to happen. And in the meantime, President Clinton was opening a Holocaust memorial.
I have been in the former Yugoslavia, and Mr. President, I cannot not tell you something. We must do something to stop the bloodshed in that country.
So the Americans got a bit more into action, and everybody came up with a plan to divide the country in 10 provinces, each with their own control, their own transport, economy. Thing was, on paper it all looked good, but in reality, for example, for the Serbs, this was very hard to control their areas and form a separate state. In the meantime, on Serbian television, about this plan.
Prevarili ste se. Stavljanjem potpisa na Vance-Ovenov plan, Srbi nisu izvršili samoubistvo. Srbi su ovim potpisom samo pokazali svijetu da će ostati i opstati na svojoj teritoriji, na teritoriji Republike Srpske, a parlament će reći svoju riječ.
So, now the Bosnian Serbs had to decide whether this plan was a good idea or not. Remember what I said, Bosnian Serbs. So Serbians living in Bosnia who had their own leaders. And during a meeting at their self-proclaimed capital at an old Olympic village, they came together, and Milosevic, all the big leaders were there, but they did not want General Mladic to be there because he was considered a war criminal. So you had all the big leaders, including Serbia, who kind of agreed on this plan at this meeting. Stones were blocking Mladic's road towards the meeting. But thankfully to the CNN, he was able to find his way towards there.
Gledaj, to mi je prva pomoć od CNN-a. Dobar.
So, at the meeting, everybody was shocked. This guy came walking in with a couple of maps, and he showed the old situation and what would be the new situation under the plan. The Serbs would lose a lot of ground, and in the end, this whole plan got cancelled. So with that, the plan for a multi-ethnic Bosnia collapsed, and in the meantime, the Croatians in the south started to invade Bosnia because they also wanted their own part of Bosnia, their own Croatian state. Before they were allies, but suddenly they also became enemies.
Ja sam činio sve da se ne otvori drugi front koji je stalno visio u zraku.
President Izetbegovic was desperate to hold on to his ally.
The Bosnian leader traveled through Serbian lines to meet the Bosnian Croat commanders in Mostar.
Ujutro smo se dogovorili, on je u jedan stan na nekom 4. katu ujutro došao, zapravo je to starac ipak, koji popili smo kavu.
Ja sam taj dan imao dogovoran razgovor s njime o nekim našim problemima dole u Hercegovini, jer je i tu situacija bila između nas dosta teška, između armije i HVO-a.
Gledajte, ne treba kriti činjenicu da narod u Hercegovini bi bio najsretniji da Hercegovina i cijeli dio pripadne Hrvatskoj.
Vidjelo se da Boban i njegovi ljudi idu na sukob. Idu na sukob zato da ocijepe komad Bosne i Hercegovine, da je pripoje Hrvatskoj. Jasno je taj plan bio skoro jasan.
The Bosnians had all reason to believe that this was actually happening because the Croatians and the Serbians before had talked a lot about dividing Bosnia between them. So all these plans were already laid out. It was no secret. It was all recorded, these meetings, way before the war. So the Croatians continued their assault on Bosnia and Herzegovina. Their former allies that they used to together fight with against the Serbians.
Radimo hrvatske postrojbe u unutrašnjost Bosne, sve tamo do Dervente, Doboja, radi sprečavanja, nego li da se ograničimo na obranu hrvatskih područja.
During these assaults, Muslim villages stood in their way. And also here, terrible things happened. Unfortunately, all sides participated in what you could call a genocide or useless murder of civilians. Many of these were actually convicted in The Hague. We will show you this footage later on this video. It will be very interesting to watch. So now the Croatians imprisoned their former comrades and they built camps. Yes, exactly what you think. Concentration camps, which gives you memories about World War II. a Muslim journalist somehow was able to talk his way into one of these camps near Mostar.
Svi ljudi bili dovedeni u te tankove, u te cisterne, praktično u te skladišta za benzin koja je koristila bivša Jugoslavenska narodna armija, gdje je bila kasarna JNA. To su bili skladišta u zemlji, u brežuljcima, a bile su ogromne vrućine i imali su samo jedan mali otvorčić od 20 centimetara kvadratnih kroz kojih je ulazio zrak. Ljudi su bukvalno umirali.
To je jednostavno jedna vrsta ludila i pogreške koja se dogodi kad bude puno naših momaka masakrirano i tako dalje, uzavre ta krv do granica kad se evo onda ne promišljaju stvari do te mjere da se onda napravi jedan logor kojeg se treba stidjeti kao čovjek i kao Hrvat.
The Croatian government was well aware of what was happening in these places.
Postojanje logora nije moglo biti bez znanja predsjednika Tuđmana. Onda sam ja ispomenuo logore i tko to organizira. On kaže, ne možemo se mi Hrvati samo optuživati, možda ima nešto, ali i drugi imaju logore. To nije bilo opravdanje.
The Muslims by now saw that they were being annihilated by all sides, and with the minimum weapons they had, they put up a very fierce fight, and the Croat advance was actually broken. In revenge, they blew up the Muslim bridge, which stood for more than 400 years. This was an iconic symbol for the Muslims.
It was 4 years to the day since the Berlin Wall had come down, ushering in the New World Order.
In the meantime, America was watching all this and they were like, hey guys, we don't like this anymore. Two administrations stood by, they did nothing, they left it to the Europeans, who obviously could not sort it out. So the Americans put an ultimatum on Croatia actually, because they wanted Croatia to stop fight the Muslims. And they gave Croatia a choice. Stop the war against the Muslims, or we will also pose sanctions towards you. And well, Croatia chose in this case the American way.
Tlu Bosne ne dođe do civilizacijskog sukoba i između zapadne civilizacije i islamske civilizacije i zbog toga zapadni svijet je preporučivao nama sporazum sa muslimanima.
So they kind of made a deal. And while all this was going on, bombs fell in Sarajevo, killing a lot of civilians. So now the Americans also put an ultimatum on the Serbs. Remove all your heavy weapons from Sarajevo, or else we're gonna screw you over. And well, on the last day of the ultimatum, very unexpectedly, Russia stepped in and said, we will fix this. So Russia packed all his military gear and they drove right to Sarajevo, which of course forced NATO to not enforce their ultimatum, because now there were United Nations troops on the ground. Yes, Russia is somehow part of the United Nations, strangely enough. So, there was somewhat a ceasefire at this point in the whole war. But the Serbians were still not satisfied, not happy, and they were like, you know what? we can kick these Muslims' butt. And that's exactly what we're gonna do. So, while the whole United Nations or United States was celebrating that Sarajevo finally was liberated, as in that all the fighting stopped there and the people could finally walk the streets safely, the Serbs were already planning different military actions. Like Srebrenica, this was also by the United Nations designated as a safe area. The Serbians, for their upcoming actions, they picked the city of Gorazda, a very important city for the Muslims in Bosnia. So the United Nations were on the ground and the town was being shelled. And the United Nations so far did not use any air force until the Serbian tanks finally reached this town and the United Nations called in their first airstrikes in this war.
I'm at 8, right at 10. We have bomb splash.
The first bomb hit a Serbian command post, a tent, but the Serbs were not deterred about this, and in retaliation they surrounded 150 UN personnel and they became the hostages of General Mladic.
Allow any single member of UNPROFOR to leave his territory alive.
It brought home to us the limits and the difficulties of using air power when you had such exposed forces on the ground.
So the United Nations, they sent out the delegations to the Bosnian Serbs to talk all this through. And while that meeting happened, yeah, crazy stuff keeps just coming up.
Usali smo aperitiv.
Just after the salad, as it were, we got an urgent message saying that General Rose was trying to get through.
Hello, Mr. Akashi. Michael, I'm here. We need air support now, over.
We embarked on one of the most surreal experiences of my UN peacekeeping career.
Sir, I don't think that by the time the message gets to the units on the ground, they will all be either dead or captured, over.
We ourselves were in the room with the soldier holding on to walkie-talkie, in which essentially the UN commander was thinking of calling in planes to bomb the people whom Mr. Karadzic was just talking to.
Ja sam onda bio veoma ljut i rekao sam, Mladiću, morate mi kažete istinu.
And well, this is what Mladic had in mind.
Это general Mladic.
Mi smo tako srećni dočekali trupe Ujedinjenih nacija i na kraju smo konstatovali da je 10.000 Sarajlija, civila, poginulo ovde u prisustvu trupa Ujedinjenih nacija. Kakva ironija.
Yes, the United Nations had failed completely within this conflict. So, Srebrenica, protected by a handful of Dutch troops, they were walked over by the Serbian army very quickly. They had no chance of protecting this area, and we can conclude a large genocide happened in this village. During this trip, we visited Srebrenica, and even though many Serbians nowadays would say all these things did not happen or it was a setup, I have seen the graves from 2 3-year-old children myself.
I tamo tišina je malo, zatim se čuje lovež psa, laju, zatim opet tišina, čuju se kasnije meci, pobiju i vraćaju se na drugu stranu, uzimaju opet.
And yes, in this case, the Muslims were not holy either.
nastupio je trenutak u kome se apsolutno nije moglo očekivati da sve to bude pod nekakvom razumnom kontrolom.
And while all this was going on, Croatia had time to arm up because Serbia still controlled a large part of it. Croatia had used the time to totally boost up their army to eventually completely crush the Serbians. All they needed was the green light.
We are concerned by indication that you are preparing for an offensive in sectors south and north. Znači, imali su tu im služba nije za taj.
A couple of days later, the Croatian army started its assault on rebel-held capital Knin. You can say in a couple of days they completely crushed the Serbian forces. They had a big advantage in men, armor, everything. Serbian soldiers had fled in panic, and well, this time the tables turned on the Serbian civilians. This time's war crimes towards these civilians by the Croatians.
Sami su Srbi odgovorni za takvu sudbinu kao što su je doživjeli.
In these battles, the Croatian had again befriended their Muslim ally, and together they finished the job. So also Bosnia and Herzegovina was now a free country, as somewhat a ceasefire existed now. And while Croatia and Bosnia were celebrating, you think this would be the end? Not really. Sarajevo happened. A grenade attack from the Serbians on a market, which left roughly 80 people dead. And this is exactly what the Americans were waiting for.
Finally, the decks were cleared for a real military response, not some piece of garbage.
A real bombing campaign, not a pinprick, not just a campaign, not just a bomb or two, not just a day or two, but as much as it took.
And the bombing missions did work out. Suddenly, everybody there wanted peace. So they went back around, sitting around the table to discuss things further. While in the meantime, it was still being backed up by constant American bombings on Serbia and Serbian positions in Bosnia, etc.
So we said to Milosevic, wait a minute, we want to set down some ground rules. Number one, no historical lectures. No bullshit. Mladic is getting angrier and angrier, and finally he erupts in another one of his statements about the Serb people, the Serb nation.
Samo im je srpski narod toliko veći trn u oku koliko ovo duže traje, jer je ovo za njih katastrofa, da su sila number one i da trebaju da pregaze svet kao da uzmu četku pa ga prefarbaju u boju koja njima odgovara, a nisu još to raščistili sa nekim malim srpskim narodom.
The Americans were having none of this, and they said, hey dude, you came here to become serious, and you guys are all talking crap, so see you later. We're walking out.
Ja se bojim da je general Ratko Mladić, koga inače cijenim kao oficira i kao čovjeka, nažalost nakon 3,5 godine rata potpuno izgubio kontakt sa realnošću.
In the meantime, Croatian and Muslim forces, they crushed through all the Serbian lines in Bosnia, and they were losing more and more ground. And all this fighting created again a whole wave of Serbian refugees going back to Serbia and Montenegro. Montenegro, the only country that in all this time still supported Serbia. With all this happening, the United States did something they did not want it to do, and that is invite a war criminal to the discussion tables. Milosevic was welcomed in the United States.
Come over here. How confident are you the talks will succeed?
Well, I'm optimist. I believe the talks will succeed. We attach the great importance to peace initiative of United States.
The design of the new Bosnia and Herzegovina had to be drafted on the tables here. And that was very hard to do. Because from the beginning on, and all this would be a very, how do you say it, tough nut to crack. So they came up with a plan. Divide Bosnia in two parts, Muslim Croat part and a Serbian part. They somehow could not change that situation. So the talks continue with walks and drinks.
And Chris Hill and Milosevic and I took off, accompanied by security guards, and we walked out to the edge of the base and around the fence.
And we ended up at the officers' club at about 11:15.
They then invited the Bosnian ministers to the club.
Maybe we could get them together and they could at least talk like, human beings.
I went over to say hello to Mladic, and I told him that Milosevic wanted to talk about Gorazda.
And he wanted to come to my table.
He said no.
The fact that he comes to my table gives him, in a way, a psychological advantage. That he is doing something, that he is making a concession, and so on. So I said, no, I'll go to his table. These are the small Balkan ways.
So they somehow came up to an agreement. And while everybody was celebrating, they realized they forgot to invite the Croatians to the party.
He's pointing to a farm he has in Ilija. And I'm never going to give this up. And 6 hours later, they had practically restarted the war.
Surprisingly, Milosevic said, you know what, I'm going to settle this problem myself.
He said, you deserve Sarajevo because you fought for it. And those cowards killed you from the hills, meaning the Bosnian Serbs.
Milosevic gave it to him. I was amazed.
Of course, he wanted something in return for it. This all came up to ground, territory. Everybody wanted as much as possible as they could get. So, eventually, they somehow managed to agree on a deal. They invited Milosevic to see the discussed territory which he would have or lose. And yeah, this is just another epic scene and weird ending to this sick war.
And we began to, quote, fly President Milosevic up and down a road that ran through the mountains from Gorazda to Sarajevo, which if upgraded, might do the trick. We did this till about 2 in the morning while a great amount of alcohol was consumed. And they shook hands and they said, okay, we've got an agreement.
So we actually brought in a bottle of wine that the secretary had brought with him, and he said, let's celebrate.
So where all had failed, the Americans eventually succeeded in ending the war in Bosnia.